Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Cup, Duet Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I will be your host for this episode, Ryan Borochovitz, co-artistic producer here at Cup of Hemlock, and I'm joined today by a very special guest. You've been on some of our reviews before, but I think this is the first time you're actually reviewing a live show with us. Jimmy Zhao, hi, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great.
Great. So we're so
Glad to
happy
be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here because today we are going to be reviewing the show Migrants, spelled with 4 A's, which is by the Romanian playwright Matei Visneic, and is presented in its Toronto premiere by 2000 Feet Up Theatre Company, directed by Siavash Shabanpour. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing anybody's name. That might be a recurring thing throughout this review, so apologies in advance as a blanket statement. And the show is running at Theatre Pass Marais until January 28th, 2024, the year we are now in. So we're going to have a lot of fun diving into this show that we've both seen, have some interesting conversations. As always, we're going to start with a non-spoiler section for anybody who's not yet sure if they want to see the show and doesn't necessarily want to have things spoiled. And then we will have a much richer, spoiler-filled discussion after that. But before we dive into it, I always have to ask, what's in your cup today? But Jimmy, do you have an answer to that for me?
No, and the reason is because right now I have a dog, just out of frame that I'm petting, and if I disturb him in any way, he's going to be upset, so I can't go get my cup. I will say that later today, my cup is going to be full of tequila because it's my birthday.
Yes, happy birthday. Thanks for doing this on your birthday.
Yes, no problem. No, there's nothing else I would rather be doing than this podcast. Yes.
So you will have your tequila in your cup after the fact. Thanks for not getting sauced before we started.
Who says I didn't?
Who says you didn't? Yes. True. What is your dog drinking?
Is my dog drinking? He
probably water.
I don't know. Steam whistle he likes.
Steam whistle, nice. Fantastic. As for me, I'm drinking water as a good dog should, and I have it in the cup. Hey, that's the show you're watching right now. So I think before we get too deep into this discussion, we should probably start with just a brief, again, non-spoiler plot summary of the piece. And I would say this is a bit of a difficult piece to describe in any concise way, as you and I were talking about before we began recording, because it is essentially a series of vignettes that are all surrounding various issues of global migration as it concerns contemporary politics and particularly the lived experiences of migrating people themselves. And we have several different pockets of plot lines that are interspersed throughout the piece and recur in different ways, and the stakes escalate throughout them as we go. But without getting too deep into spoilers, one of them is set on a smuggler's boat where we, the audience, take the role of various migrants who are trying to get from presumably the Middle East to Europe. We have another one that is set in the household of a Balkan couple who appear to have recently migrated themselves and are taking in some young children or teenagers to allow them to charge their devices in their home. We have another very satirical one with the president of some unnamed European country, possibly Italy, possibly France, who has a speechwriter helping coach him in making his rhetoric a little more politically correct. We have another satirical one where some kind of show model presenters are demonstrating some of the latest technology for detecting migrants in your backyard and selling things like barbed wire for keeping them out. It's done in a very tongue-in-cheek way. Am I forgetting any of them? Oh, of course, we have the one with the child. Yes, yeah. Which I certainly won't spoil where that one goes, but let's just say it's about a small boy trying to get himself and his family safely into Europe and the very high stakes that need to be done to allow that to happen, which I think satire is the key word that kind of overviews a lot of these. Anything you want to add to?
I think there was also I forget the details, but it's like it was like a circus thing going on.
Oh, yes. That was also, it's interesting. Yeah, no, you're right. I had forgotten about that. I remember the images, but I'd forgotten it in my summary, which it kind of interesting because it sort of felt like a hybrid between the presenter models one and but it featured many of the characters from the main boat plot line. So it was sort of like, ooh, where does this fit in the topology of the production? But yeah, it was quite entertaining with a lot of the
do you remember the exact premise of that, because I feel like that was the only one that didn't come back.
Right.
So I think that was the one that I remembered the least of.
So it was the characters who are part of our main smugglers crew who were doing this presentation, and they were kind of pitching to parents to don't come with your children, send your children along with us, because they won't get turned away when they arrive, and we can put them in some sort of Turkish labor camp or factory if they can't pay their debt until they're able to. But using flashy circus items and hula hoops and blowing bubbles and doing backflips as a way of, livening up. Isn't this fun that your kids can come with us? And it was, very cheeky but disturbing at the same time.
Okay. I honestly did not realize that was in the same sequence of events as the main boat plot.
Well, I'm not confident that it was, I suppose, because if it had been the two female models doing that monologue, that also would have made sense and maybe been more appropriate to the way that those two characters have been performed. But because it was those smuggler characters who, in every other scene, they're literally on the boat. So it's unclear where in the continuity this piece fits. Yeah. But it also makes sense that the model characters are ones who are quite anti-immigration, and the smugglers are the ones who are like, yes, please bring your children to us and we will get them overseas and across the border. So, do you have any kind of general appraisals? Did you like it? Would you recommend it before we get too deep into spoilers?
I like it. I think that it's one of those shows where it's like, because it seems to me like the purpose of the show is to create empathy for the experiences of migrants and people who, are forced to leave their country, people who, are smuggled and such. But I feel like it's like, are people going to see this show who need that to be taught to them? You know what I mean? Like, are the people who are like lacking empathy towards migrants?
Yeah, no, I definitely I get what you're saying. I think, not to get too deep into spoilers, but something that maybe irked me a bit about the show. I'm not saying this is a big negative piece against it, but I found that it did something that I think I see a lot and that I find a little tedious from time to time, where it seemed to me that the main goal of the piece was to present these humorous scenarios about these serious issues in order to provoke laughter, specifically to then turn with scorn and be like, why are you laughing at this serious thing? Maybe you should think about what that says about you. And but at the end of the day, most of the scenes weren't that funny, and a lot of the audience, at least when we went on opening night, didn't burst into side-splitting laughter. They approached it very seriously. They understood the gravity of what was happening. Even when it was presented in a humorous way, nobody lost sight of the severity of the issues. And I think that speaks to what you're saying about how is this really the audience, the left-leaning, presumably Toronto theater audience who, for the most part, is not in a position of political power to do anything about this. Are they the ones for whom this sermon needs to be preached at? Yeah, it's an interesting question. Overall, I do think it was a very entertaining piece, even if it wasn't side-splitting. It certainly was thought-provoking. You might already yourself be on the correct side of this issue, in which case you can pat yourself on the back, because the show certainly won't do that for you. Anything you wanted to add to that? It looks like you were trying to chime in.
No, I was just trying to think. I don't know if it's just my sense of humor, but like you said that there are like moments where it's trying to create like humorous scenarios. So I'm trying to think. I couldn't really think of anything particularly humorous about that, but I don't know if that's just because I have a different sense of humor or
well, and that's no, I get what you're saying, and I also, while I could recognize the rhetoric of humor in it, I also wasn't like particularly laughing myself most of it. But and that's why comedy is so subjective. Everybody has a different sense of humor, and as a result, I find these kinds of pieces that seem to have that stated goal of making you laugh so you can question why you're laughing. It's a very difficult needle to thread, because it has to be legitimately funny enough to provoke part 1 in order for part 2 to actually happen. And if you don't succeed at that, you might not.
It definitely succeeded in like making me kind of uncomfortable. I feel like is
Right.
like the overarching theme of what we're talking about right now, especially like from right where it starts. And we can talk about it when we get to like the immersiveness of it. But
well, I think that this is probably a good time to we've given some general thoughts. We've kind of created some broad strokes outlines with very light spoilers. If anybody wants to maybe check this out without hearing too much about it, this might be a good time for us to break off. Once again, this is Migrants, being performed by 2000 Feet Up Theatre Company. It is playing at Theatre Pass Marais here in Toronto until January 28th, 2024. Now, if for anybody who's still with us, we're going to, if you're watching this on YouTube, put a Ziploc bag on the screen with the words spoiler alert in it to keep it dry. Yes. And now, from this point on, we can not be so cautious about what we say. It's all spoilers from here.
So, can we talk a bit about like the experience of us walking into the theater and sitting down before the show starts?
Yes, please.
Because I feel like that was like one of the most memorable like pre-show. So like we go in, they hand us 2 Ziploc bags, a small one and a big one. And then we sit down, and then right next to me is one that's like just as reserved. And because I've like done immersive theaters before, I know that and one of the actors is going to sit in this chair next to me if it's like reserved with no name, which kind of ruins it for me. Like maybe someone who like hasn't been to these sort of shows before would like be more surprised.
Blown that an actor is next to me.
Yeah, like we sit down, you talk. A woman comes and sits next to me. Where I clearly an actor, even though there's nothing indicative about that from looking at her, but just
she was doing a good job of presenting audience.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, if you've seen the show and you aren't like me, who's like super seasoned and can see where all the strings are, maybe talk about your experience of going to like Migrants and like how you reacted to, because like then when the show actually starts, the audience takes like the role of a boat full of migrants. I forget the details, but where we were going.
Yeah, to Europe, vaguely, I think.
Yeah.
There's a route where we would go like through Turkey to the island of Lesbos to eventually
right
in Europe, wherever that means.
Yeah. And then you could sort of feel like and of course, the lady sitting next to me was a plant, and she was like, so whenever there's audience participation, she would like, say the correct chants, just keep the illusion going in case the audience, doesn't catch on, as well as we should. But I think it was kind of funny how like at the beginning, and there's the land acknowledgement, and also the okay, and put away your phones, and then immediately the actor, whose name I don't know.
Yeah, his name is Ahmad Amiri. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing any names, but he played the boss, the head smuggler of this operation.
Right. Yeah. And he's kind of like, like I don't know if you've ever been to like Universal Studios or like those sort of like Disneyland where, you're sitting in a ride and it's part of an adventure and there's someone who's like there and there's like in character, like, oh, we're going to go fight the Decepticons. Just sit down, strap in. That's sort of like, that's what his role kind of was. And he's like, okay, take out your phones because you're going to need it, which I think was like, it's kind of cool how immediately jarring it is from the land acknowledgement and put your phones away message to that in a very, like I said, I used the word uncomfortable before because this was like very uncomfortable. It was, oh, wait, but what if someone calls? But what
to be fair, he didn't tell us to put the ringer back on. He just said, get it out and type in this number or put it in the Ziploc bag and bounce it in our head. but yes, it was still a concern of, okay, this is completely the opposite of what front of house just told us to do.
Right. Yeah, and we had to do so much. We had to like put in a number into our phone.
I still have it in mind. I didn't delete it after the fact. I haven't tried calling it.
Yeah, like what happens if we call it? Like there's so many questions that are just raised from the first.
Yeah, was it the Coast Guard or I forget who the number specifically?
Yeah, I forget. I think someone said like another plant in the audience was like, "Oh, is that the Coast Guard number?" But then he's like, "No, it's this. It's something." And I don't remember.
I forget. Apologies to anyone who.
Yeah. yeah, we had to put in our head like just from the start. It's like, oh yes, this show is going to make you uncomfortable, and I don't know. I don't know if it would have been better because I feel like it never reaches that level of discomfort.
It doesn't, which
Or
yeah.
like I don't know. Do you think it would have like I'm not sure exactly what my feelings are, but do you feel like it would have been better for there to be like a climax of discomfort or something, or is it better to jump in? Or
yeah, I had a similar thought because it really, that first scene is my view, the extent of the immersion. There's very little that is as immersive after that. So it kind of peaks right there at the beginning, and then there's no real payoff to it. It's actually funny. You mentioned the plastic bag, so we were given 2 plastic bags, one to put your phone in to keep it dry, because again, we're on the boat, and a larger one to use as a barf bag in case you get seasick. And as we were getting to our seats, me and my clumsy hands, I dropped my large bag underneath the seat of the person in front of me, and I couldn't reach it. I asked them if they could reach it. They weren't able to reach it. So I went back to the usher to request another bag because I lost mine. And the usher said, yeah, you don't need it. It's fine. And I went back to my seat. I still had my small bag for my phone, but nobody, unless you are actually going to throw up in the show, nobody needs the large bag.
And like maybe it would have been better if they just gave you a large bag and said, we only have like in character, in the universe of the story, be like, we could only afford these bags, so you can use it to hold your phone and also to throw up in if you have to. Because like I feel like that would both tie in more to the themes of like scarcity of resources that are throughout the play, and also like make more sense and not waste the black bags.
If we have to throw people overboard to not make the ship sink, maybe we don't have enough bags for everybody. That would be something to think about. And getting back to what you were asking about, like the climax of that immersion. I knew from the marketing copy of this show or the press release, that it was marketing itself as being immersive, and that can mean a lot of different things. And my first thought is, is this going to be like a Sleep No More, where we walk around the space and have the freedom to see whatever, and different scenes are happening elsewhere? It's in Theater Pass Mirai, so there's a limit to how much you can do with that. But no, it is the extent of the immersion is that you are at the beginning, you're surrounded by actors, you're given props, and you are as the audience inhabiting the roles of absent characters, i.e. the people on the boat. But because there are audience plant actors there, we never really feel as invited to immerse ourselves as I think we should. If there were no plants in the audience, then it would be on us to shout the number back to us. Like, I was trying to do that, but I realized I was out of pace with way too many people who had the pace of shouting that number correctly. So I stopped shouting it because I didn't want my terrible rhythm to mess up what is clearly a rehearsed sequence.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't feel like we were being invited to immerse ourselves in that way. And as a result, I think what the opening sequence and the immersive elements did very well is that they put us on edge that, okay, this might be immersive. We are given a bag to throw up. Is something going to happen in this show that might make us throw up? Like, we don't see a lot of things that are that intense in Toronto theater so often, but you never know. It's if we're being, we're having a man in a scarf shouting at us about the high stakes of what we're doing. He takes a melon and smashes it on his knee and says, that'll be your skull if you don't do everything I say. So I think it does a good job of the discomfort that you were alluding to, putting us on edge of what could happen, but then feels like a missed opportunity when not enough things do happen to pay that off.
Yeah, especially because it's sort of like a sequence of vignettes. Mm-hmm. I think it's kind of like, so they bring you directly into this world. They drop you right into this world, and then they like cut away to like other things throughout. So like maybe I'm thinking like maybe if I were to go back in time and like knowing what I know now and like redo like the show and their roles, maybe I would want to like, keep it, instead of a series of vignettes, keep it like one story that the audience is like following along for the entirety. So that way they're constantly immersed. They're always in that one sequence of events, that one universe, instead of what this play is, which is like a series of vignettes, which I don't think, now that I'm talking about it, I don't think works for immersion.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're actually committing to making immersive theater, I don't really see how like the sort of vignette
Yeah. The only
structure works.
I think that it could have worked if each vignette was as invested as the first one in immersing us, planting in little things that would get us involved in it, make us feel like we're participants in it. But if we think about the one with the Balkan couple, they're literally behind a screen. They cannot even acknowledge that we are there. And then you have the president and his coach on the top balcony. Great spatiality of, sequestering these little stories in their own little space. But yeah, there was no way for us to, even if we had been invited to be immersed, is just too much of a literal critical distance being put in between us. So yeah, it's, it feels like a lot of missed opportunities. I think perhaps you were hinting at this. I do think we could have done a whole version of this show that was just on the boat if you added more scenes to that plot line, and we could really feel like, yes, we are the
claustrophobic and wet and uncomfortable. Yeah.
And maybe actually, interrogating people of like, are you the one who didn't pay? Is that
right?
So you're going overboard. Put on this life jacket, and you can actually, it would be a little concerning about like, oh no, what is going to happen? You're obviously not on open water, so there's limits to what can actually happen to you. But yeah, a whole play of that could have really worked. I do get the sense that as thematically linked as all of the individual pockets are, they weren't always necessarily in service of the aesthetic whole that I think this piece could have been. I won't say what it's trying to be, because clearly what it's trying to be is this sort of, comic review. It sort of reminds me of a show that was at Tarragon last year, Redbone Coonhound. I don't know if you saw that. But it had a main plot line throughout, and then every so often would cut to some kind of sketch comedy thing that was thematically relevant to the serious conversation about race that the main plot was having, but was completely sequestered into its own little bubble. And, it was basically like Mad TV interspersed in the serious drama. And, we're not reviewing that show, so I won't necessarily comment on whether or not I thought it worked there either. But I think another counterpart that we could maybe compare this to, I'm sure I won't be the first or only reviewer to draw this comparison, but you didn't see Bad Roads that was at Crows earlier this year? Or last year now, because it's 2024.
See, now I feel like I was like the wrong person to do this. I don't know. I haven't, ever since my current life, I haven't been seeing nearly as much theater as I did when I was younger, unfortunately. But
that's fine. No worries. Yeah. No need to justify or apologize. Everybody sees as much theater as they're able to. With Bad Roads, and I think why that could actually be a comparison that a lot of people will draw. One, it's set in Ukraine and 2014 when the first sort of flashpoints of the current war with Russia were happening. And it was also Andrew Jonas in both of them as an actor, so that might also remind people that they've seen him recently in a similar play about a humanitarian crisis. But I do think that was also set up in little vignettes, but each one terminated before we moved on to the next one. It was really an anthology of standalone pieces. And the fact that we were constantly interspersing between these ones, and the fact that they weren't all equally as immersive or invested in immersiveness as each other, really did put an asterisk on how immersed we could get, I guess, while consuming it.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to comment because I didn't see that, but I do agree, and I think that you brought up a really good point, which is, and this is jumping forward in time of the play. A certain point, a plot line within the main boat story is that there were too many people on the boat than there were supposed to. And the thing is, with boats, with stowaways, you have like set amount of food. Like I said earlier, you have a very scarce amount of resources, so you can't have more people on a boat. And then there's this plot line where they need to, throw out this part I wasn't really clear on. Were they just like, we have to literally kill you because, or was it like, we're going to put a life jacket on you and good luck, because I wasn't really clear on that. Yeah.
So what was happening is, yes, we will have to put the life jacket on you, throw you overboard, and then good luck getting yourself back to shore or have another boat save you. But you're out of our hands. But then we find out in a later scene, again, we're post spoilers here, that one of the key smugglers in the crew cheaped out and bought cheap life jackets. So everybody who we retroactively find out he was thrown overboard, inevitably died because they sunk instead of floated.
Oh, see, I thought everyone at some point would have had to put on a life jacket and get to shore that way. I don't know if I was just misunderstanding, because because maybe I'm just like applying my past experiences from like watching interviews and stuff where people are always like, oh, we get to a certain point, then we have to jump out and then swim to shore or something. So at the end, when they're like, oh, the life jackets didn't work, my interpretation was, oh yeah, every single fucking person died.
I didn't even catch that. You were probably right about that. I was so caught up in the fact that we're putting life jackets on people to literally throw them overboard, that like I didn't even think of the fact that other people would have to finish the journey swimming with their life jackets. So I think you're right. Probably everybody on this boat, which, remember, is supposed to be us within the immersive framing, has perished as a result.
Yeah. I mean, like I don't think either of us are like certain enough to like say for certainty. If you watched it, just let us know what the actual thing was. Yeah, but you mentioned, and I think there is like a version of this where it's like maybe we don't know that the people next to us are plants, and then they have to like you see them like going through the aisles of the audience trying to figure out like who to throw overboard, and then they pick some people and then they fight for their lives. They fight to not be thrown, maybe not for their lives, but they fight to not be thrown off the boat.
Make a case for why you should stay and somebody else like it's the end of the Dark Knight, for lack of a better comparison. Is there good in people, especially people who are all in dire circumstances, and forcing us to take on the role of what that moral calculus might feel like while you're also fighting for your own life and trying to get to a better place? Yeah,
exactly. And it may be like, there's a vote. Maybe they bring up people and have the audience vote on who deserves to stay on the boat, who deserves to be thrown overboard. Like there are all these like especially now that we're talking about it, there's like a lot of like missed opportunities where like the immersion could have been pushed a bit more to like really meet the goal of what I think, or what we think they were trying to do to accomplish with the show.
Yeah, well said on all that. In terms of just some more general reviewing brass tacks, any particular actors you quite enjoyed and want to shout out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main guy, the boss,
Murray. Yes, he was excellent. I'm worried for his voice because he shouts a lot in this show, and I hope he can get through the whole run without blowing a vocal cord or something.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like he does a good job of like being the main focal point and keeping, because he kind of holds it together, especially at the beginning where he needs to get like the entire audience to like pay attention to him, and at least until it cuts to a different vignette. But I think he does a good job of expressing that, and the horror at the end of when he finds out what happened with the life jackets. Yeah, I think he did a good job. Did you want to speak to someone else?
I'll agree with you on him. I think he did an excellent job. It was sort of the perfect balance with him of like trying to be intimidating, but also trying to present professionalism. And the fact that I think his character emblematizes both of those, that I'm doing something illegal, but I'm the best at what I do. But also, if you step out of line, everyone here will die. So the stakes are very high. And I have to, keep you in line through fear and yell at you in, I assume, Arabic or possibly Farsi. But at one point, and having his men do the translating, which I also, in that moment, sorry, this isn't about the acting anymore, but I thought dramaturgically, I would have liked if the men translating for him weren't in unison and weren't using the exact same words as each other, because interpreting and translating are two very different art forms, and unless you're actually gonna like beat it out and get the words, the odds that all of them will have this monologue perfectly in unison with all of the exact same words in English rendering is probably pretty slim. So little things like that, as a dramaturg, I find like, ooh, there's so much you could have done differently with those. But yes, I think as a charismatic leading man, I think he did an excellent job holding it all together. I thought the president was very funny. He was played by Garrett Mallory Scott. We talked about this character.
Oh yeah, by the way, we didn't mention this earlier, which is good because it was a friggin' like scariest jump scare in the entire thing where suddenly Donald Trump appeared. I mean, he's not Donald Trump, but he's clearly made to look like Donald Trump.
He both is and is not Donald Trump.
But he has like we said, like a European or Italian accent of some sort.
Possibly French, it's unclear.
Yeah. But, it's clearly meant to sort of represent the sort of like, right-wing anti-migration politician that, of course, nowadays even in 2024 is, and like symbolized by Donald Trump. Yeah, I mean, do we like I'm no expert on accents, but I think like whoever in the cast was doing an accent did a pretty good job.
Yeah, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think since we've started talking about this president character, it's kind of something that we were discussing as we were leaving the theater. I wrote a later question about this, but we could kind of get into it now because it's relevant to this character, that this figure who both kind of is or is not Donald Trump or some kind of stand-in of a very politically incorrect, hardline right-winger. It's interesting because you pointed out to me, I didn't even catch this, that in the program it says that this play premiered in Italy in 2016. And here we have it now in its Toronto debut. And I'm curious if we'll get your thoughts on this in a second, but if you think it, accurately reflects the way that the world has changed since 2016, and Trumpism is a big part of why. I don't know, do you want to comment?
I think you put it kind of well in the conversation at the end, where after the show on Tuesday, when I think you said that the whole like criticism of like political correctness seems kind of like extremely like outdated at this point, like a very 2016, because this was like, written according to a program, it came out November 2016, so right when Trump was elected, which means it was being written while Trump was not yet the president-elect of the United States. So I think in that environment, it's sort of like, oh, you guys probably think like Trump is bad, but really like, his political incorrectness, but really other politicians just are like similar to Trump, but they cover their beliefs in like political correctness or something. But I think like now that we're living in 2024, where, Trump has already been president, it sort of feels like political correctness seems to be like the least of our worries. Well,
it's interesting because the Overton window has certainly shifted in how we kind of understand the rhetoric of political correctness, like what made Trump seem so jarring to the mainstream political elite is that he just said whatever without worrying who he was going to offend. Whereas we have characters like this president who is Trump in that regard, but then we have the coach who's like, no, here's how you can say the exact same substance, but in words that will not trip people off to how horrifying what you're saying actually is.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you have Trump being like, yeah, they're rapists, they're coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
And as we know now, because this was written before he won, we now know that political correctness doesn't matter because he still won.
Yes.
So like he didn't need to cover up his things. So it just sort of feels like a talking point that might not be like as relevant now that we know what we know.
I know, and I feel the same way. We want to be charitable about kind of what maybe, even if it doesn't mean the same thing now as it did back then, what maybe it could still mean is that it is maybe a stark reminder that even though we've passed the point with the death of euphemism and politicians gain, traction by saying just whatever they think will rile up their base the most, we could at least use this as an object lesson in just because this is much more abrasive doesn't mean that it's any more harmful than the old previous version that is encased in this veneer of political correctness. And even anti-Trump people in the Republican Party, as few of them as there really are, who do speak in a much more polite, measured tone, are still essentially pushing forward the same policy decisions and political action as him, just in a way that makes it seem more palatable to suit and tie wearing people. So I think we could still, appreciate that what we are being presented with is that political correctness isn't the solution. It's not what's wrong with Trump, but it still feels like a bit of a dated way of presenting that point with a character who's so explicitly Trump-like.
Yeah, I think honestly, yeah, probably like maybe if they didn't make him so explicitly Trump, especially like in 2024 when Trump is once again, not only, by the way, I just want to say as of right now, January 18, my birthday, 2024, not just the Republican frontrunner to be the Republican nominee, the frontrunner in general beating Biden by like a percentage point.
Happy birthday to you.
Still not politically correct at all. So still saying the exact same crazy stuff as he always has. Yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of like, when I saw that, it just sort of, I don't know if the year of like 2024, if this is the year to be making content that's like Trump isn't the worst. You know what I mean?
Fair.
Even if that's true, even if it's true that other politicians can be just as harmful as Donald Trump, I don't know if that's what the message we should be.
It's a very South Park kind of argument, I suppose, which maybe we don't need that right now. Fair point. But suffice to say, the actor who played the president, Garrett Mallory Scott, did a fun job with this character in a very sketch comedy kind of way. Very, 2015 SNL, I suppose. But yeah, he did fun. The person who played the coach as well, Henry Oswald Pearson, was a very good foil to him in terms of their different styles of political language games. Yeah, just if we're kind of looking through some of the cast here. Oh, one last cast shout out I do want to make sure we give to is the actor who played the little boy Elihu, whose name I have here is Parastu Amanzadeh, which apologies again if we're mispronouncing any names, but I think she did an excellent job. Apologies, I'm not aware of your pronouns, but playing this little boy I think was it was probably the most heart-wrenching piece of this entire show. I don't know if you want to talk about this whole segment in particular, because I know you were worried about possibly spoiling where it's going in the intro.
There was, so there was this one. Okay, so the next question is about favorite production / design element.
Yeah, sure.
This part actually confused me because the little boy, I forget the boy's name, but there's like this character that's like seducing him to move somewhere, I believe, to
get himself and his family safely to Birmingham,
right?
In the UK, but he has to give up parts of his body to finance his way.
Yeah, and he, the voice presents it as like a very like, oh, your body is like your capital. It gets you money, and then you trade your money, and that's your power or something. But really, of course, it's just like to manipulate him into like
your kidneys and arms. Your kidneys and
arms. Yeah, exactly. But in terms of production and design, what confused me was, so I think the visual for the man who's speaking is supposed to be the guy with like the top hat or whatever.
Yeah, or
he was like
in the top corner.
Yeah, and he was like in the top corner in front of us, but the voice was coming from behind us. Did you also get the sense that was sort of?
I certainly got the sense. I think we're supposed to just suspend our disbelief that he is the one who's talking. I don't know why they didn't just have the actor doing the voice be the one standing there in the fedora. I feel like there's probably some sense where they're trying to be jarring and alienating, where we have this uncanny effect of I can see him there, but it's like a godlike voice omnipresent in the space from elsewhere.
Because also, like, they don't look at each other. Like, the two actors are having a conversation, supposedly, the two characters. But the boy, Elihu, is looking behind the audience. And by the way, there were so many audience members, like, looking behind us, like, see where the voice is to find. And there's no voice, but it's supposed to be coming from the guy up there in front of us.
There definitely was someone on the balcony saying this aloud. It's not like it was as far as I could tell, I don't believe it was pre-recorded. But then we have elsewhere on the balcony the figure who we're supposed to interpret as the source of it.
So I couldn't really figure out what the purpose of the sort of like these two characters are talking, but they're not looking at each other. And the guy, the one man is like in front of the audience, but the voice is coming from behind the audience. And right, like I couldn't really figure that out. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, or
I don't have a good theory about why they chose to do it this way. If it was me, I would still have the silhouetted figure standing there, but I would just have them being the one reading the script. Or saying those lines, preferably if it's within sight of the audience, maybe having the lines memorized. I think if I saw correctly that whoever was saying the lines from behind the audience was holding a script like on a music stand in front of them, so perhaps that part wasn't intended to be memorized or not yet fully memorized. And I can't figure out, based on like looking at the cast list here, which of the actors would have played that voice or that role or even the silhouette.
I mean, they did a good job.
Oh yeah, very menacing yet charming, which makes it even more menacing.
Do you see who it was, who the actor was that sat down next to me? Because we should
no, there's
give
several,
a special shout out to her for
there's several ensemble characters who I wouldn't know which one specifically. I didn't get a good look, and trying to match them to their headshots might be a fool's errand.
Oh, and the other thing we were talking about was that, and I thought was so funny, was that at some point the voice is like, "Oh, do you want a Coke? Here, have a Coke." And then I couldn't see what it was, but I think like a toy car or something goes in front of Elihu, and then he opens it up and it's a Pepsi, and I just laughed so hard because it's like because I'm assuming that the implication is the decision making thought process was, we're going to show that this character is untrustworthy or something.
I think that's exactly
so instead
right.
of giving a Coke, he gives him a Diet.
And yet it's also, there's layers to that untrustworthiness, because on one hand, if you offer someone a Coke but all you have is Pepsi, whatever, it's a cold, syrupy beverage, like you were functionally getting the same thing. Elihu and his family do get to go to Birmingham and start new lives for themselves, but it's not quite what it was cracked up to be or what was promised to you, because you have to give up various body parts in order to succeed in doing so, to the point where in the final scene, I believe it was just an empty wheelchair, and we're supposed to assume, heavily suspending our disbelief, that Elihu's body is withered away to nothing, yet the ghost that was once in the machine is somehow still hovering above the chair that we could believe is still alive in some way. I don't know. It gets a little too trippy there.
And that's the difference between Coke and Pepsi. One of them is the equivalent of getting your organs removed and dying, and the other is...
If anybody who works for Pepsi is watching this, we don't think your product will make our bodies wither away into nothing because somebody wants us to exchange them for capital. But the show seems to think that. I feel like
the next episode is just going to be like, "Oh, what's in your cup, Ryan?" And it's like, "Oh, Coca-Cola."
Coca-Cola.
So we're sponsored by Coca-Cola.
Yes, # not sponsored by Coke. Okay, that's great. Was there any, aside from the hilarious little item of the Pepsi, was there any other production elements or design pieces that you'd like to shout out or comment on?
Oh yeah, so this is another like one of those weird like temporal things where it just feels like culture has shifted. Is that the second one with the two girls? I forget what you called what they're
listed
called.
In the program as the presenters.
And
their names are, I have them here, Keely Kroll and Shannon Petrie. Apologies.
So the joke is they're in like pink boxes labeled barbed wire, like Barbie, but like
yes.
But I don't know. That was like another one of those, because you know how like I said like 2016, it felt like really like 2016. That felt like really 2023, and for some reason that ages it more. You know, like
2023 because Barbie is hip again, and we all posed inside pink boxes when we attended the movies this summer. Is that?
Yeah, like is that a weird thing to say? Like even though it was just like a few months ago, it feels like it ages it super like ages it to a large degree.
Yeah, I guess we are living after the end of history, and things accelerate at a very rapid level, and we don't, it's very hard for jokes to stay topical in this way, I guess. It made me laugh, not gonna lie, the Barbie wire, but...
It made me laugh in like the sense of like, oh, that's a really bad joke.
Yeah, exactly. I would say the same way. It wasn't that this is like the most side-split, similar to what we were saying at the beginning about how, it really wants you to laugh more than it actually provokes laughter. But, I think in my mind, that's a compliment to the audience and their political facility and understanding these issues, rather than it is necessarily a negative comment about the show itself.
Yeah. And I think that was like the only other design. Like, what other especially like notable design elements where that we haven't talked about already?
One that I liked a lot, and I'm still puzzled over what to make about it, but in that first scene where we're on the boat and one person is asked if I forget if it's like, do you have your passport or do you not? And they were asked. Once again, it was one of the audience plants, an actor who we saw later on in the production was brought on stage, and they took out a leaf blower and kind of blew him, and then on the screen projected behind him, all of these documents were flying away.
Right, yeah.
Like, that was just a very striking image, and because it happened so early on, it was another one of these things that, again, might have been a bit of a false promise, but, like, this is the kind of bizarre surreality that you could be in store for in this kind of show.
Yeah.
I don't know if it really paid off. We never really had another element like that. I guess the closest we came to was, like, the circus lights kind of thing.
Yeah, and when the clown, for some reason, like something, I forget what happened, but like something happened to his nose, and he was like projected all over the back.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite understand what to make of that.
I just kind of read that as whether this is what they intended or not, as like, we're all having fun, right? We're going to take your children away and put them in labor camps. And so it's just like this disruption in there where like you see literal blood projected on his face, like a reminder that this is serious, for a moment before we go back to the comedy. But again, I don't think anyone was confused about how serious it was. So,
like I feel like when you're already like talking about labor camps and stuff, it's pretty clear that no, this isn't actually the fun time that it's being. The irony is pretty.
Which and it's kind of unfortunate because if I want to again just to compare it to Bad Roads again for a moment, like there was a few little funny bits and pieces in that piece, but for the most part, it took itself very seriously. It was like, you probably as a Canadian watching the show in Toronto don't know the extent of what's going on in Ukraine, so let us actually show you how bad it is there. And, there's value to that kind of thing where, we are disconnected from these conflicts from the comfort of our positions of privilege here in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I think this show took a very different approach to this, that we want you to similarly think about and be exposed to how terrible things are, but we're doing it in this kind of maybe a little too Brechtian for its own sake way, where it's trying too hard to skip a step, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's, they could have just presented like things are really bad. Now you probably knew about it in broad strokes, but now you know the specifics. Whereas if you're leaving the theater laughing, as again, very few people were, it's just kind of adding extra steps of mental labor to be like, oh yeah, things are bad. Maybe I should contact my representatives about this.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like we've kind of more or less covered all the things we wanted to talk about. Do you have any last thoughts or anything else you'd like to bring up before we sign off?
I'm just looking at the. No, I think we've gone over everything.
Yeah.
Oh, right. One other thing. I think the I feel like the one we haven't really talked about in any sort of depth was the couple in their house, and then so. Just so I'm understanding what actually happens there.
Sure.
There are kids who come to their house.
Yeah.
Because they need
just a place to plug in their devices, it seems.
Okay.
It's, if I understood this scene correctly, and this was probably the slowest burn out of all of them, and it took several installments of it before we even got a sense of what was really happening. It seems to me that they and their characters here are listed as the Balkan Man and Balkan Woman, even though they had proper names that I no longer remember that they were referred to as in the show. But we hear at one point in a later installment of the boat scene that like once you arrive on land, these are the things you should say to people in order to gain sympathy and to do the next steps to eventually get yourself in a nice European household. But one of the things that the boss says is that, but whatever you do, don't make your way towards the Balkans because things are so much worse there wherever it is you're coming from, geopolitically and in terms of military violence and civil wars and aftermath. So I think what we're given a little vignette of here is that this is presumably a couple that has migrated out of the Balkans to somewhere else in Europe. They have this little home that they can now call their own, and it's very much not like the home they're used to. We see the evidence of that in terms of him wanting to take a hammer to build a new door in the back because this house doesn't have enough doors or as they're accustomed to. Right. And and he's obviously he mentions that he's getting a new job that's going to relocate him again, where he has to lay a barbed wire fence somewhere. So they're using the labor of migrants to keep other migrants out as some sort of, I guess, Ouroboros of the problem that were presented here. But then we have the kind of most pervasive part of this plotline, which is that local youths, presumably also migrants themselves, are coming to their house to just charge their devices. At first, it's one member of the ensemble who they are trying to have a conversation with, and she's like, my phone, plug it in. And then the next time we check in with them, there's a whole bunch of members of the ensemble huddled around various outlets and chargers and extension cords to as if that's some kind of like program that they are now offering in their home. Right. The word got out that they are hospitable to that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the whole like building a door, is a pretty obvious antithesis to like building a fence or building a wall, which is another like very 2016ism.
Yes.
And then the ending. Oh yeah, right. That's another, I guess, the design element. The ending of like when they're hammering the door, it matches, it turns into the heartbeat that we heard earlier. Which I feel like they could have not played the audio of the heartbeat. I feel like
wish they hadn't. If they just let the hammers evoke heartbeats.
Yeah, that would have been enough on itself.
But it's a point taken. If some people might have not caught that, then it does prompt us to engender that comparison if some people might have not caught it otherwise. But yeah, I agree. I think I'm a big fan of analog technologies in my theater, so if you could just create a heartbeat sound with your hammers, I think that does the trick also very well. Yeah, that's, I will say, I think that is the biggest kind of question mark in the entire piece of, like, what are these scenes adding to it? What is it trying to say? If I'm remembering correctly, that was the image we were left on, right?
Right, yeah.
Hammering. There was also like 4 different points in this when I thought it was going to be over, and then nope.
Yeah.
There was, I feel like maybe this will get improved as the run goes on. We saw it on opening night, but there was a bit too much dead space in transitions between scenes sometime. And, you know, when the lights go down and there isn't yet a sound cue promising that another scene is coming, I was very prepared to clap thinking it was over at multiple times when it apparently was not over.
Right.
But maybe that's just a technical issue that will get ironed out as they go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess in terms of last thoughts, I do just want to say, even though we've had some critiques, most of which constructive, I do think this is a play that is worth seeing. People should check it out if they haven't already and have been listening to all of these spoilers. It's, you know, it's interesting. It's certainly very different from a lot of the things we have on our stages today. It is a very European style. The playwright himself is Romanian. It premiered in Italy. And we don't get a lot of theater that plays with these conventions. We do have a lot of more kitchen sink realism in our Canadian theater ecosystem, or kind of musical dramaturgy in a lot of ways that sort of seeps into a lot of the main contemporary drama. So I think, yeah, I would love more people to see this show, even if they don't love it or have similar or different critiques from us, to, you know, just have an experience, unpack it, and, you know, maybe get some inspiration artistically, even if the things it's saying politically are not always as innovative as it seems to think they are. But I guess the counterpoint to that, though, is there is still very much a migrant crisis. And if this show can inspire anybody to maybe take some action against it, donate to some charities, contact their representatives, if it succeeded in making you feel more empathetic towards them and you want to let people into your home, if only just to charge your phone, I think, well, that maybe is a good thing. Who's to say?
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, please. Anything else?
Oh, yeah, I just want to say, if you're watching this and you live in the States, as a birthday present to me, can you just make sure Trump doesn't win this year? Because remember, whatever problems you have with Biden, Trump will be worse on everything, as proven in his first term. Because, you know, he ordered twice as many drone strikes in his 4 years as Obama did. So any sort of any problem you have with Biden about anything, Trump will make it worse. Okay, thank you. That's all I want to say.
So if you were planning on voting for Trump, but you want to do Jimmy a solid for his birthday, I will remind you, change your entire voting pattern.
Yes, if you're living in the States and you're watching this podcast about Toronto theater, because that's your interest, and you're thinking about voting for Trump, do not do that.
Yes.
You're in that democracy.
Soapbox complete.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Jimmy. Before we sign off, do you want to plug your social media or any contact if people want to find you or follow you anywhere?
I have a YouTube channel called I Will Say This Though. We being me and my friend, we mostly just use it to make really long videos where we rank things based on the silliest criteria we can think of. The one of our earlier videos was ranking Batman movies by how racist they are. One of them was ranking Pixar movies by how fascist they are. As a joke. That one was 4 hours.
I have to ask, if you were to rank the vignettes from this show based on a silly criteria, what would it be?
Oh, rank the criteria itself?
Yeah, ranking. You don't have to come up with the full ranking if that takes too much time at the tail end of this episode, but what would be the silly criteria?
Ranking them based on costume design and whether or not I would wear what they wear.
Beautiful. Love it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that's your YouTube. If anybody wants to follow you personally, care to share your socials to plug? If you want, no pressure.
I don't really do much on social media. I am writing a book that
if any literary agents want to get in touch with you.
Yeah, if any literary agents, that's a good point. You can send me an email at jimmy.zhao.writing@gmail.com.
Nice.
And we can probably put that in the bottom.
Yeah, all of these will go in the description of this episode.
Yeah, right now it's just full of query rejections and stuff like that. Anyways,
okay, but every great book needs to get rejected 30 times or something before it gets eventually recognized for the piece of genius that it is. So don't
exactly.
That's great. As for me, no need to find or follow me personally, but if you like what we do and you like hearing me talk about theater, you can follow us at Cup of Hemlock Theatre. It's at COH Theater on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Not calling it the other thing. We've had our fun. It's over. We are Cup of Hemlock Theatre on YouTube, where you might be watching this. We're the Cup of Hemlock Theatre podcast and all the podcast places where you might be listening to this. Like, share, subscribe, do all those things. Okay, everybody. Once again, this has been a review of Migraaaants with 4 A's, presented in its Toronto premiere by 2000 Feet Up Theatre Company, and it is running at Theatre Pass Marais until January 28th, 2024. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you at the theater. Until next time.
Don't vote third party.
Don't vote for third party. Cheers.